Hello, welcome back to Life on the Franch. Today we're going to be talking about hamster cages and why size matters, amongst other factors. About a month and a half ago, we rescued our latest hamster, Bruno. If you want to know more about Bruno's adoption story in full and the weird way that we got him, you can watch up here. But today we're going to be focusing on the differences between his previous enclosure with his last owner and the enclosure we've chosen for him, and why our enclosure is better. So Bruno was previously housed in a Tiny Tails rocket ship cage. I'll put that over here. But basically, among many reasons why you shouldn't get that cage, the biggest one is that it's way too small. So to demonstrate this, I thought I would mark out how big the square inches are according to the website. I'll put that here so you can see what dimensions I'm going to be using. But it's basically 15.8 inches by 15.1 inches. So I'm going to mark that out and try to put the bare minimum things that you need inside of that space. And I'm also going to show how that space, that square inches, compares to the 40-gallon tank we have Bruno in now. Then I'm going to talk more broadly about things that you should look for or consider when picking out a hamster enclosure, because there's a lot of options out there that do meet the requirements, but what are things you could consider to make sure you're getting the best cage for you and for your hamster. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So in this amount of space, this is the smallest wheel. Bruno is a dwarf hamster, so this works. It's like an 8.5 inch wheel, I think. But if you had a Syrian, obviously you would need a larger wheel. I have one hide, again, that's a dwarf size hide, so wouldn't really work for a Syrian. I have a tunnel, I have a water bowl, 2 chews, and this would be the sand bath. Look at how little stimulation that is compared to the cage Bruno actually has now, where he has tunnels, he has 6 inches of bedding, he has multiple hides, multiple kinds of tunnels, underground tunnels, a second story, water dish, a huge sand bath with another hide. You know, you just can't fit all of this, obviously, into half of the size. So, and again, like I said, this is being incredibly generous for what the actual cage is. If you cut out the corners, this has to go. This now needs to be in the center. That can probably stay there. This needs to move in. Maybe put the chew there. You're looking at like that. So absolutely no floor space, really. And the pan depth does not give the ability to do at least 6 inches of bedding in the Tiny Tails cage. So obviously one is inferior to the other. So aside from the size of the cage, which in the US right now the minimum requirement is 450 square inches. Personally, I like the 40-gallon tank general size a little bit better. It's a little bit bigger than 450 square inches most of the time. It depends on if you're getting like a reptile thing or a fish tank. You know, make sure you measure it for yourself. But in square inches, 450 square inches in the US is the minimum. Abroad, it's more like 600, 620 inches. So 450 is still, could be bigger. And it also depends on what type of hamster you have. Now, all hamsters, like dwarf hamsters, need at least 450. For Syrians, you're looking more like 600 as a minimum. And I would even maybe push that up more. But we have dwarf hamsters. We don't have Syrian hamsters. And that's just the way it's worked out. So that's where my knowledge is centered around. So aside from size, what factors should you consider when picking out a hamster cage? There are 3 main types: glass tanks, wire cages, and bin cages. And in the category of bin cages, I would also consider like IKEA Detolf. Basically, this is the DIY third option for hamster cages. One thing that you need to consider when picking out an enclosure besides size is the pan depth. Now, for a tank or a bin cage that has solid walls like a storage bin or an IKEA Detolf, you could hypothetically make the bedding go to the top. So obviously it meets the 6-inch minimum pan depth. But what is pan depth? So pan depth refers to the depth of what this green thing is, right? In a wire cage. You want that to be at least 6 inches tall because you want at least 6 inches of bedding in your hamster enclosure. And again, with something that's a solid wall up to the top, you meet that. With a wire cage, it's something you need to check. And that's because burrowing is a natural behavior for hamsters. They do it to feel secure. That's where they make their hides. It's very environmentally enriching. And also, a benefit to us as pet owners is that it reduces the smell of hamsters. And it reduces the amount you have to clean your hamster cage in a deep clean setting, in a deep clean sense. So, aside from the pan depth and the size, a lot of the rest of what you choose to use as your hamster cage is kind of personal preference. Things that you can consider are visibility. So you have the most visibility in either a glass tank or maybe an IKEA Detolf, something that's very clear. You might have less visibility with a wire enclosure or with a plastic storage bin. Plastic storage bins, even when they're clear, have a cloudy plastic. It makes it a little bit harder to see your hamster. The next thing you might consider besides visibility is the amount of flexibility you have in your design choices. I like having the glass tank or a plastic storage bin or IKEA Detolf with the solid walls just because if I want to make the bedding super high on one side, I can. If I want to use different types of substrates and layer them, I could. And I like to be able to make things that are underground that they can like burrow into, that I can like see. And that's easier to do when the walls are clear. The next thing you might consider is transportability or flexibility in location. So a tank, once you've put the tank together, put the tank where you want it, it's very heavy. It's harder to move. The reason I think the transportability is a factor is if your hamster is ill and you travel, or if you know you're going to be moving in the near future. Some people really prefer to have the ability to reach into the cage like from the side as opposed to the top. So with glass tanks and IKEA Detolfs and plastic bin cages, you have to reach in from the top. And this can be really stressful for hamsters because they're prey species and one of their major predators are birds. So some people really prefer that front opening thing, which I think is the main benefit to wire cages. They tend to have more openings, usually the top and the side, and I do think that is really beneficial for getting your hamster out in a casual thing, or even if you're trying to get especially if you're trying to get your hamster out quickly. Having those multiple entry points can make a big difference. The last thing I'll say is ease of assembly. I did make a bin cage, and I went through how much making the bin cage cost. I made a plastic bin cage, and if you want to see that video and how I did it, you can click up here. I included the cost of the tools as well as the cost of the supplies, so you can check that out, and you can compare that to wire cages and tanks. I would say even having to buy the box cutter, as long as you have a drill and you're willing to go to a Target to get a bin versus getting a bin online, you're saving at least $20, even compared to the cheapest wire cage, and even more if you're looking to get a tank. So I do think it's a very affordable option that still gives your hamsters everything they need to have a fulfilling life. So definitely a solid option. but obviously it requires a little bit of elbow grease. The next hardest to assemble, or in my opinion, sometimes more difficult to assemble, are the wire cages, or some of the cages that are shipped to you. Like I've watched reviews of like Munchie putting together like the Night Angel ones that have rubber bands. I've not made it, so I don't know how difficult that is. And she says those, you can watch those reviews to see, but it's definitely a factor to consider. Personally, I'm not that handy, so it would make me nervous to assemble that. I have put together wire cages in the past, and it can be incredibly frustrating. So I actually think the bin cage might be easier, but that's a personal thing. So just how do you assemble it? And obviously with tanks, the assembly is not hard, but having it being able to carry into your apartment or your house and setting it up can be difficult. It's definitely a two-person job if you were me. So Stan and I have had to carry up our tanks, and we only live on the second floor. If we lived in like the fifth floor, like our apartment building doesn't have an elevator, wouldn't have gotten a glass tank, would have done a wire tank. That's why I'm saying the weight matters, the assembly matters, the cost matters, but most importantly, as long as you're getting the right size, which again, 450 square inches at least for dwarves, over 600 at least for Syrians in the US, and 6-inch pan depth, it's all about your lifestyle, baby. If you have other factors that you consider when picking out a hamster enclosure, please leave those below. We can all learn from each other. I would love to hear your opinions on what the best hamster enclosures are. If you want to see more of our videos, click subscribe, ding the bell button to know when we post. Most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye! So, cost obviously is a factor. The reason I didn't bring it up when I initially filmed is because I can't go through every single cage and say what's going to be more expensive or the least expensive. However, I did make a video where I made a bin cage and broke down the cost of the supplies and the tools needed to make a bin cage, and it ended up being about $41. That's going to be cheaper than than buying a wire cage or a glass tank. By a pretty significant amount. That said, there are sales that happen when it comes to tanks. We got one of our tanks on a $10 for 10 gallons deal, so we got 40 gallons for $40. That's the same price we paid to make the bin cage. So that's why I didn't go into it that much, but obviously take your budget into account. As long as it meets the 450 square inch minimum for dwarf, probably more like 600 for Syrian, and the 6-inch pan depth, then as I said, the rest is up to you.